fairly extensive briefings and presentation from all of the people who were at the table today at our last Transportation Committee meeting. And so I don't know if we need to repeat that, but they're here as resources for you if you have questions about any of the points that were brought up today or any questions that you may have. But I did think that it would be helpful for Beverly to just give us a brief overview of the petition, the vacation petition, and then we can begin our discussion. So go ahead, Beverly.
Okay, so I'll just do a little bit of background on the nature of the decision and the steps in the process. So as the city council members are very familiar with this, but I think it might be helpful for everyone looking at what this decision is and what's in front of the city council today. So the city council makes every street vacation decision of every size, whether it's the closure of a full street or alley or a narrowing. Every street vacation decision is made by the city council. The street vacation authority comes from the state, and the state has delegated that to legislative bodies. So the city council is exercising authority delegated by the state. The city council has not delegated additional authority to SDOT or DPD, so every decision remains a province of the city council. So the city council has asked SDOT to provide staffing. And as we talk about the steps in the review process, you can see that the background work is pretty extensive. It would take quite a few Ryans to try to do this, but it's our role is different. We're merely advisory. So when the city council delegates authority to the Department of Planning and Development to make rezone recommendations, it's a much more formal delegation of authority, and the decision that comes back to you is a decision. And so there are no standards of review or anything. It's our job to help you make good decisions about street vacations, and we try to implement direction we have from the city council on previous vacations and to implement the street vacation policies. So as we noted, the decision, the authority comes from the state. The state sets out a few legal parameters, mainly around signature requirements, fees, the public hearing process, but the real guidance that we have is in the street vacation policies, and that is a city council document that provides guidance to all of us, and that's really what we try to implement in SDOT and provide background for you in your decision making. The street vacation policies are very conservative in nature, and in fact there is a statement that we often use that says the city's default position is to retain right-of-way. So we do feel like when people come in for a vacation decision, there's kind of a hump for them to go over. It's also the intention that the street vacation policies provide guidance so we know under what circumstance it's appropriate for someone to proceed. So we do spend a lot of time working with people before they come in for a vacation and helping them understand the costs, the obligations, the council expectations, and the feasibility. So a lot of vacation proposals that are problematic don't ever get to the city council because we can use the direction and the guidance in the street vacation policies to say, maybe this isn't the best avenue for you, and suggest something else for them to work on. So it is intended to provide guidance and clarity and consistency. I think when the policies were first done in the 80s, the goal was to provide consistency in decision making, and I think that has held true over all these years. There's a fundamental basis there that the council has been consistent in acting on. So for petitions that do come in the door, once they're introduced at City Council, they're forwarded to SDOT, and we provide the background work. When major developments come in, there are usually several tracks that they're on. The street vacation is the legislative track, and they're also going to come in and work on generally their master use permit at the same time. The very first step that happens is the EDG, or the early design guidance, and that's intended to be a step that a developer takes before they have a street vacation petition or a master use permit in the door, and that is a community-based design review process where the community has the first look before we have anything formal. So the early design guidance is step one. Once they get through that process, people will generally start their regulatory review kind of in a similar track. Our review procedures are time-consuming and complex, and people generally go through several of them at the same time. And it's our job at the staff level to try to track and calendar things. So environmental review, master use permit process, street vacation review. Sometimes we have projects in the street review district, and we might be coordinating, or we're going to have one in the market commission review, or special review district. Sometimes there's a major institution master plan. There might be a rezone, council traditional use. The Denny project we'll be seeing next year has some type 5 land use actions that the city council will be making. So it's a pretty complex process we're moving out. But the street vacation, we try to keep that really distinct because it's a policy-based decision and we're implementing the city council policies. So the design review and design commission, and Michael will jump in here too, I'm sure, have separate procedures. I think, they both talk about design, but the design commission is, their review is required by the Seattle Municipal Code, and they look at all street and alley vacations, and they look at the urban design impacts from the loss of the right-of-way, and they look at the public benefit package and make a recommendation to the council on that. The design review board looks at, as part of DPD's regulatory process, and they're really looking at building massing and more of the building itself. They'll look at materials and windows. So their reviews are separate. We do try to coordinate so that design review and design commission happen in a similar time frame. So the two, and these are citizen boards, are seeing things at a similar level of design, but they have a separate purview, and we do work to keep them focused on what their purview is. So the design commission advises the city council. The design review board is a part of the master use permit process, and so their conditions are reflected in the drawings and the recommendation that comes from DPD. So in addition to all of that, SDOT circulates the vacation petition pretty broadly for input, and this is when we'd be having meetings to address drainage. Seattle drainage is often very complex. City light issues, Luke and people in traffic operations and other people in SDOT would look at access and turning movements and the adequacy of the proposal. So we go through looking at design issues, coordination with other regulatory actions, issues related to the street vacation policies that are both technical and policy-based. And when we get through everything, we package a package of suggested conditions together. And so SDOT does send forward a recommendation. It's our goal that the recommendation is fairly neutral in tone. We generally reach conclusions on the different areas. So the street vacation policies ask us to look at the street functions, and that's the public trust functions, and that's circulation, access, utilities, light, air, open space, and views. Those are the primary purposes of streets. We also look at the land use impacts, and that's changes in the city grid from the loss of the right-of-way and compliance with adopted policies and goals of the city, and then public benefit. And public benefit is generally where the city council spends most of its focus. But so we try to lay out for you what we've done through our review, what we've seen, what the issues were, how they were resolved. And with this, you have a big package of comments and response that were attached to our recommendation. We sent forward a recommendation if we have clarity. In this case, we did have a question about whether the council was going to look at new public benefit elements, but the recommendation has the same issues. The conditions cover both public benefit as recommended by the design commission and other utility and standard kinds of conditions. So the city council would be acting today to grant as condition the petition, which is contained in a clerk file, and the granting as condition would include all of the conditions and the public benefit obligations that are outlined in the SDOT recommendation.
Okay. Thank you very much. And There's been a public review process or an opportunity for the public to weigh in. Could you briefly talk about that, both with regard to the design review board and the design commission? How many meetings did they have? Is the public able to participate in those?
Yeah, the design commission and the design review board are part of the city's public procedures, as the individuals who spend all those hours on that are committee members. So that is a part of the public process. The design commission is citizen experts, and they met 4 times on this project before reaching a recommendation. The design review board, also they had 2 early design guidance meetings and then two design review board meetings. So, as we've seen from the public comment and as you've seen in our recommendation, this has engaged a lot of people, and there are a lot of different viewpoints. So the design review board and the design commission are a part of our public process. They're citizens that advise us, you in your legislative role and DPD in its regulatory role. They do take public comment at those meetings, and they do review letters and input, but they take more limited public input. It's like a public comment period or public hearing. It's not a public forum that's really engaged. So we have the design review board members and the design commission that have a separate task, but they do provide an opportunity for public viewing of the discussion and public comment.
Okay, thank you, Beverly. Did anyone have a question about process related to this?
I know
Councilmember Bagshaw.
I know there have been many other meetings besides the 4 from the Planning Commission and the Design Review Board. Could one or all of you just talk about the meetings? That somebody that spoke early said that she had not been involved in the process or that their group hadn't been, and I just would like to have on the record what the outreach has been.
The slide up here, I just moved to slide 5.
Okay, so Michael, identify yourself again and speak up, please.
Of course. So I'm Michael Jenkins, Director of the Seattle Design Commission. As you can see, there were 3 sets of meetings in the city review process. The Design Review Board meeting, which looked specifically at the structure. The Design Commission meetings that are related to the allocation process, which you see here. And that specifically looks at the urban design merit and the public benefit package, which is generally focused in on right-of-way enhancements. And then finally, you see a listing of the variety of meetings internal to the city that looked at the host of issues related to the loss or replacement of the infrastructure. Beverly talked a little bit about that. And then on the far left, you see a series of community outreach meetings in a variety of locations that occurred beginning in January of 2012, and it looks like they ended at about the beginning of 2013. Many of those occurred, as you can see, prior to the application being submitted to the city, and I'm assuming I was not a part of those meetings and didn't engage in them, but I'm assuming that was to gauge public support or interest in the project.
Am I reading this right? I'm just picking one out there. The West Seattle Junction Association is about 7 down from the top. They've actually had 10 separate meetings on that.
10 meetings. The project, which of course may vary based on the interest in that project.
What you're pointing out, it seems to me, is not only have there been 4 design review board meetings on this before they made a decision and recommendation, not only have there been 4 design commission meetings, but also there have been a number of community meetings, outreach, I assume by the petitioner in this case. Is that right?
Presumably.
Okay.
Yeah, that was really my question. Is I'm always concerned if somebody says they didn't know, or they didn't hear, or they didn't have a chance to speak. But that looks to me like there's been a lot of meetings in a lot of different venues. So I just want to know if there's something we've missed, because when somebody says we want to delay it.
We also have a list of everyone who attended all those meetings, and I'm passing that down as well.
Thank you.
Other questions? Councilmember Burgess?
Thank you. Beverly, I assume that SDOT and you specifically in coordinating the review of this followed the normal process that you follow for
Yes.
public right-of-way vacations.
Yes, there's nothing different about this process. It's been more, but it hasn't been
Okay.
different.
And in that process that you followed, did you asked city departments whether they had any objection to the alley vacation.
Yes, the very first step with the new vacation petition is what we call the circulation, and it's just exactly what it sounds like, that we send notice out within the city pretty broadly to, of course, within SDOT to a number of different divisions, to City Light, SPU, Police, Fire, Department of Neighborhoods, DPD, and people from their area of expertise will send in a comment, and that way we'll be able to identify whether there's a drainage issue or some other design work that needs to happen. And with this, there were a number of meetings that the developer engaged with SPU. Within SDOT, we had a couple of pretty extensive meetings. They're really more like design charrettes, looking at the design and dimensions of the mid-block connector before we determined that that was safe and functional and was appropriate to proceed.
And I think that has been one of the points that's been raised a number of times in the public comments, as well as the comments that we've received in writing or by email, the mid-block connector. So, Luke, do you want to talk about that?
Luke Corby, Seattle Department of Transportation, Street Use Division. As Beverly mentioned, we had numerous meetings with the project proponent to talk about various aspects of the project related to the alley application. One of the main focus areas was the design of the mid-block connection, which was specifically the subject of a series of design charrettes that we participated in along with the project proponent and DPD and the design commission as well. Through that process, we examined various alternatives for taking the proposal that was in front of us and looking for the best means of meeting the overall intent of the West Seattle Triangle Plan. And through that process, we feel that we did come up with the best solution. The proposed design of the mid-block connection through most of its length provides for a separated pedestrian walkway, separate from vehicle traffic, separate from truck traffic. At the one location where there's an intersection where the mid-block connection meets the existing north-south alley, we looked at that interaction of pedestrians and vehicles very, very carefully. Two of the main tests that we want to try to meet when we're looking at an intersection operation is the intersection going to operate in a way that's predictable for both pedestrians and drivers? Will drivers be expecting pedestrians to occupy that shared space? Will pedestrians expect that vehicles will occupy that shared space? And it met that test through the design. Secondly, and referring to this area right here, the second test we want to meet is making sure that there's good visibility between drivers, trucks, and pedestrians, that they can see one another, that they're able, in the case of pedestrians, to make that crossing safely. And it met that test as well. Overall, we're quite comfortable that the mid-block connection meets the intent of the West Seattle Triangle Plan. It provides safe passage for pedestrians who are walking between 40th Avenue Southwest and Fauntleroy Way.
Councilmember Burgess and Bagshaw.
One last question to Beverly that I was asking earlier. After you checked with all the various city departments and they raised their questions or their concerns, is it your opinion that those were adequately addressed in the plan?
Yes, yeah, and in the conditions that those would adequately address all of the technical issues.
And then based on that and the conditions and the technical requirements, did any city department object to the application?
No.
Councilmember Bagshaw.
Yeah, thank you. Luke, I've got a question on the mid-block crossing. Could you go back to the slide that you were showing prior to this? No, yeah, thank you very much. So I have a concern about pedestrians crossing 40th Avenue Southwest to get to our future park. And I recognize that we're not there yet. I recognize it's just currently a chain link fence and it'll be some years before that park is developed. What I would like to request is, and I talked with a developer representative at the last hearing when we were here, that they're willing to assume responsibility to pay for that cost of the pedestrian raised crossing from the connector across 40th Southwest to the park. And I'm wondering if you could tell us what conversations SDOT has had with them and whether or not that's something that, recognizing it's a future decision and we don't yet want to be describing how that crossing might be, but if that's truly going to be a green street, I would like to take advantage of everything we can to slow traffic and make it a pedestrian priority corridor. So if you could just talk to me about what you've done and what the future may hold for that.
Generally speaking, the applicant has been willing to implement any recommendations that we make on 40th Avenue Southwest. The SDOT traffic operations, and specifically Dong Ho Chang, the city traffic engineer, is aware of that. And he's also interested in he's also aware of the West Seattle Triangle Plan, calling for a marked crosswalk on 40th. He very much would like to consider that. He requests that consideration be done after the project develops, when he's had an opportunity to examine actual traffic patterns, actual pedestrian usage and pedestrian volumes, see how the park develops, which will help inform him as to if a crosswalk is warranted at that time, where precisely it should be installed. It seems that if there's a thought that this may come in the future, if the developer is going to participate in that in some way, it would seem that that's possible.
I would just like to ask Councilmember Rasmussen, since I heard assurance from the applicants at our last meeting that they are willing to participate and they are willing to fund it, that I would like to memorialize that somewhere.
Sure.
So we don't lose track of that point.
Generally what we do, if we give conceptual approval to a vacation petition, is to set conditions, as Beverly mentioned. And the kind of condition that I would think that would be consistent with what you're suggesting, Councilmember Bagshaw, is that if the Department of Transportation determines that this type of crossing is safe and warranted and advisable, that the developer pay for that. So that would be a condition. If SDOT approves, essentially, and the developer will pay the cost, which they have told you they're willing to do. So is that the type of condition that we have at times included, Beverly?
Yeah, we can draft a condition language to add to
Okay.
the package.
So I know that that was also raised by the Seattle Design Commission too. They were interested in that type of crossing, and they were asking SDOT to reconsider their policies. It sounds as though SDOT is reconsidering whether or not that kind of a connector or pedestrian crosswalk could be put in. And so they're doing that, and the developer said they'll pay for it if SDOT approves. But we want to ensure public safety or pedestrian safety, and that is the primary concern of SDOT. Okay?
Thank you very much for
All right.
that. So I'd just like to say, just slowing down traffic speeds is important, and I think one gentleman talked about that West Connector, and we want to make sure that it is safe for pedestrians. And it is a place that draws people, pedestrians who want to be there because it is safe and green.
Okay.
A positive place.
Thank you very much, then, Councilmember O'Brien.
Luke, the neighborhood plan anticipated the west half of that alley, that connection to be a pedestrian only. I'm not sure if it's a question for you or Beverly, but in the conversation, I'm assuming that did we look at maintaining that as pedestrian only, and why did we end up with it being car traffic too?
Neighborhood plans, generally speaking, are implemented over a period of years or sometimes decades, and they're implemented through either the improvements that we require of development that occurs in the area of the plan, or through city-funded and sponsored projects. They're generally implemented in a piecemeal fashion. as any project proceeds and we look at the vision provided by the neighborhood plan, we strive to meet the letter of the plan if possible, but we often find through an analysis of a specific proposal, through a detailed analysis of traffic operations related to that proposal, changing land use conditions, that we may not be able to meet the letter of the plan. Still, in those cases, we keep great awareness of what the vision was, of what the goals of the plan were. In this case, we believe that the goals outlined in the West Seattle Triangle Plan are being maintained, although there will be both vehicular access and pedestrian access on the west half of the mid-block connection. The pedestrians will be able to be accommodated safely in that area through providing a separate sidewalk for pedestrians. Vehicles will be separated from them through both a horizontal planting strip and a vertical separation of curb.
And so, in this specific example, why was the letter of the neighborhood plan not achievable?
In actuality, in analysis of the proposal as a whole, our SDOT traffic operations staff believe, again, in consideration of the transportation network that we're working within the community, that it's actually preferable to have the 3 separate access points to 40th, Fauntleroy, and Edmonds, as opposed to 2 access points onto only Edmonds and Fauntleroy. And one of the reasons for that is, given the driveway access onto Fauntleroy is a driveway, it's uncontrolled, unsignalized. Given how important Fauntleroy is to the community as a mobility corridor, transit, vehicles, pedestrians, the new bicycle facility that's being provided, it's actually preferable to look for a means of reducing that amount of traffic that's entering and exiting the site via that driveway onto Fauntleroy.
Any other questions for staff? If not, Councilmember Clark, looked like you were getting ready to ask.
I was just to say that I support the idea of adding the condition that the applicant pay for the crosswalk in the future. And I can appreciate Don Ho's idea of, again, you have to have it operating before you understand exactly. And you have to have the park designed a little bit to know where those entry points are going to be for the park. I think my intent would be that crosswalk, to the extent possible, also be part of traffic calming. So if that means that it's a table style, something like that, that I think gets at what Councilmember Bagshaw's talking about as well. So I want to express that intent that it be a crosswalk as well as contribute to traffic calming and the overall goal of that being a street. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If those are all of the questions, you may have others too, but what I wanted to do now, as I did previously, was to move approval, conceptual approval of the proposed alley vacation.
Second.
Okay, now let's have a discussion of this. As Beverly said, Seattle has adopted comprehensive street vacation policies and procedures, and those are intended to provide consistency, equity, and predictability in considering a right-of-way vacation. Our overarching policy is that a vacation request may be approved only if the vacation significantly serves the public interest. And we've identified 3 components of what the public interest is. Protection of the public trust in the right-of-way, protection from adverse land use impacts, and provision of a public benefit or benefits. And some of us have urged us to deny the vacation petition because one of the tenants may be Whole Foods grocery store, but who a tenant is not a criteria that we use in determining whether to grant a right-of-way petition. We must focus our consideration on the vacation proposal's impact on the public trust functions that streets serve, that is circulation, access, utilities, light, air, open space, and views. With regard to the protection of the public trust in the right-of-way, this is defined as, again, providing for circulation, access, lights, utility, air, open space, and views. In considering an alley vacation, the critical question is whether the public will lose traditional alley functions or will lose those functions, or will those functions be pushed out onto the streets? With the current proposed alley vacation and the proposed mid-block connector and the remaining north-south public alley, the access that current alley, the traditional alley functions, such as delivery loading bays and access to parking, will continue to be served, so that we will not be giving up that alley function in its entirety. It will be served by the mid-block connector. In fact, the Seattle Design Commission at its April 18, 2013 meeting concluded that the new location of this function, and which is a wider private alley, would provide a valuable through-block pedestrian connection and would actually better meet the need identified by the city and the neighborhood in the West Seattle Triangle Urban Design Framework than the current east-west alley, which is petitioned to be vacated. The Department of Transportation, as Luke has said earlier today, concluded in its March 11th letter to the City Council that it can support the mid-block connector if various conditions set out in that letter are conditions of the vacation, and we've already spoken to a certain extent of those conditions, and are provided for in the street improvement plan and in the master use permit. SDOT carefully considered and reviewed the data available and found that the current proposal of the dispersal of traffic to multiple driveway access points is superior to a pedestrian-only connection in the mid-block connection on the west side of the block, because that would send more traffic to the uncontrolled driveway and the bike lane, which is on Fauntleroy. While a pedestrian-only connection to 40th is probably workable, as said by SDOT, the current proposal with its 3 entry points will help to address the impacts on the surrounding streets. Also, the Department of Transportation conducted an impact analysis, a transportation impact analysis, and it concluded that with the project, traffic operations at the surrounding intersections would remain at acceptable levels and is not anticipated to degrade in level of service from without project connections. The overall impacts of truck on-site traffic are anticipated to be minimal. Adequate capacity exists, according to the traffic impact analysis, to serve the increase in traffic demand or travel demand resulting from the proposed project. In addition, the project encourages pedestrian activity through widened sidewalks, additional landscaping and rain gardens, art, and street furniture. So those are the points, that important points regarding protection of the public trust in the right-of-way. And so my conclusion is that we are protecting the public's trust in the right-of-way if we were to grant this condition, or to grant this petition, because all of the functions of the alley are being served by the mid-block connector. With regard to utility impacts, as Beverly said, City Light, Seattle Public Utilities, and then the private utility CenturyLink, I gave careful review and established conditions that were set out on page 10 of the March 11th letter, under which the utilities in the alley can be moved. With regard to the other consideration, that is light, air, open space, and views, page 11 of the March letter to the City Council states that the West Seattle Triangle Plan specifically identifies the alley as providing for a pedestrian walkway through the block. The current alley does not provide any important views and does not provide for a usable space for the public. If the block were developed with the current alley remaining in place, it is unlikely that the goals of the West Seattle Triangle Plan could be met, because there's not a sufficient space to provide for a pedestrian walkway. That pedestrian walkway can be provided through the mid-block connector. The proposed project will provide wider sidewalks around the perimeter than that which is required by code. And the proposed project also provides for small plazas, public plazas, adjacent to the entrance along 40th Avenue Southwest. In fact, the project will provide for more usable open space than the amount of alley right-of-way that is being vacated. So light, air, open space views are actually being enhanced and improved if the alley vacation is granted. Then, with regard to protection from adverse land use impacts, city policies require that the project that is proposed is consistent with the city policies for the neighborhood. And page 15 or 14 of the SDOT letter where SDOT says that it does not find adverse land use impacts associated with the proposed vacations. There are two vacations, 2 alleys. The project is designed to be consistent with the zoning, which is NC3, and uses permitted outright within the zone, which includes a grocery, retail, residential, and structured parking. Similar uses and density could occur without the vacation of the alley. DPD noted in its comments that the West Seattle Triangle Urban Design Framework anticipated this type of large development. The Southwest Design Review Board, as Beverly mentioned, reviewed this project closely 4 times, and they recommended approval, not unanimous. Rarely do we have unanimity in this city, but the Design Review Board, a citizen-based board, recommended approval of the design with conditions that are included in our documents. The Design Review Board has recommended that the conditions be part of the master use permit, and those are included in their July 11th, 2013 minutes. The Seattle Design Commission also met 4 times on this project, and on April 18th, 2013, found that the proposal is justified in terms of urban design merit with certain conditions, and those conditions are also set out in our documents. With regard to the provision of public benefits, the street vacation policies require that a project provide a long-term benefit for the general public. And the Seattle Design Commission reviewed and approved the proposed public benefit package. And that is also set out in the Seattle Design Commission minutes of April 18th, 2013. And those public benefits include voluntary building setbacks, mid-block pedestrian connector, 5 small public plazas, a new crosswalk across Alaska Street at Fauntleroy Way Southwest, Green Street improvements along 40th, adjacent to the property site, landscaping along the Masons property, streetscape improvements around the development, including art, street furniture, paving treatments, and enhanced landscaping, a monetary contribution of $25,000 toward design of the park north of 40th Avenue Southwest, improvements to 40th Southwest to facilitate parking at the new park, and a bike lane along Fauntleroy. While the Department of Transportation did not make a recommendation with regard to the alley vacation, it did recommend that if the council supports the vacation, the council should include a number of conditions listed by SDOT along with the public benefits package. And I sent you earlier a list of those conditions. So my conclusion is that the public benefits are strong, that this project will be better with the vacation than if development on this site were to occur without that vacation. And again, we've talked about the width of the sidewalks being greater than they have to be, the plazas, the pedestrian crosswalk, park, all of those public benefits would not be provided without the alley vacation. We have a long list of conditions that the departments have asked us to include if we are to approve this. And it takes up a full page, everything from related to undergrounding and drainage to lighting and to setbacks. So I do recommend approval of this vacation. We know that some people do not want this to go through because of Whole Foods, but again, that is not a factor that we may take into consideration as to who the tenant is in this case, as long as it is a permitted use, and it is not right permitted use to be a grocery at this site. Council members, comments? Yes, Mr. McCauley.
This is for the, Design Commission folks and staff. In the listing on the public benefit matrix, there are 2 plazas listed. But on the drawing there, you get circles around. Look, the way it's got. Go back.
Could you pull your microphone
Yeah.
closer?
Okay. So the information provided on the public benefit matrix lists 2 plazas, the Gateway Plaza and the Linear Plaza. And on this draw, okay, you have
So there's the Gateway Plaza here at Fauntleroy in Alaska.
Right.
There's you could call it a plaza, it really is a significant Green Street improvement. And then there are also 3 smaller plazas as well. So there really are 5 plazas independent of the larger Green Street improvement along 40th abutting their facility, which includes significant property line setbacks. And then there's also an off-site improvement here where the applicants proposed and the design commission recommended to accept this, where they further enhance that existing planting area.
And your list does not show 3 plazas, it just shows 2 plazas.
Well, I think you're referring to the list that the developer prepared. Our recommendation actually, and the master use permit plans that are DPD will use, show 5 distinct plaza areas. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as well as the linear improvements along 40.
And so this was given to us in a packet, so that's why I'm using this one.
I understand.
And we don't have a comparable comparison from the city. We're doing a matrix like this.
I believe
On page 21 of the SDOT recommendation letter, there's a formal list of benefits.
The letter is dated March 11th. Inside you'll see it says March 3rd. That's a little bit confusing, but the letter to the Transportation Committee chair is dated the 11th.
So,
Oh, go ahead.
that list includes public outdoor rooms on Fauntleroy Avenue, which are those.
This one here.
Right.
It still is just 2 plazas.
Well, the public outdoor rooms are also are
Plazas.
2 of those plazas. Yeah. The 2.
These are called rooms and plazas depending on where.
Pardon?
They're called both rooms and plazas, but they add up to how many again? 5.
5 areas designated,
Right.
but we just didn't list them. And then the Gateway Plaza, my understanding is that was supposed to be a signature item because that's where the traffic land, people will be seeing it, and that was supposed to be a strong statement. That plaza is just over 500 square feet, at least that we have listed on our. So that's the size of a studio apartment. I have a hard time imagining that big a plaza.
The design commission evaluated it, and they felt that it was appropriate for the corner in accompanying the other elements that are included in the plaza, which are art features, seating areas, and then its relationship ultimately to the building that provides both a vertical element at the corner and then the horizontal treatments at the corner. With that coupled with the significant sidewalk setbacks, they felt created an appropriate plaza for that location, given the population.
The day is who?
The Seattle Design Commission
I see.
felt it was appropriately designed given the site, its location, and the number of likely
So
users.
they were comfortable with that small size.
They were actually, and they're also asking for, and they were recommending, and there will be a later meeting for the Design Commission to continue to look at how that particular gateway element, particularly the art, the other elements of that have been enhanced. They were comfortable with the concept approval, they just wanted to come back for
That's
look
one
at
of the
further refinement.
comments we heard from one of the speakers earlier. I was watching all the comments earlier in my room on TV. That this did not seem to match the neighborhood plan's expectation of what a signature plaza would be for development in this area. I mean, 500 square feet is pretty small.
The Design Commission felt that it was appropriate given the location. In fact, they actually looked at the element on 4 different occasions and took public comment on the proposal at all those locations, and they felt that it was appropriate there. When you look at the plan, actually, while it calls for a gateway here, the particular plan does not call for a particular setback at that location, nor does it call for a plaza at that location. So I think the point of the issue was that the Design Commission looked at that development for that location and looked at and felt that the distribution and the size of the plazas were appropriate.
No, and I understand too, there wasn't unanimity on the commission.
No, of course not.
Dig into this any further, it just seems that one public benefit is to be open space. I think generally has a feeling that it should be something other than just a wider sidewalk. It should be a gathering spot, it should be a place that welcomes the community and you have more interaction. It just doesn't seem adequate in this design. But I can see how someone might feel that piece of artwork might contribute to it.
And if this helps, there's more specifics about its depth and the particular elements.
Councilmember O'Brien.
Councilmember Rasmussen, I appreciate your
time to lay out the decision process, and folks from SDOT and Design Commission too. I really appreciate all the work and the information you've given all of us, and it's been really helpful. I think the process has been a robust one. I think it's good. I feel like I've been well informed as we move forward to make this decision. As a number of folks have mentioned, this is a decision around legislative discussion. It's not de facto given that if someone shows up, you can get an alley vacation. And I'm going to be opposing this today, and I just want to walk through kind of my rationale for that. When I look at the site as a whole, the proposed project, I don't necessarily think it's a bad project. I think there's a lot of benefits. We've heard a lot of community members talk about the benefits of that. When I look at the site as what could be done without an alley vacation, it is still a very developable site without the alley vacation. I understand that it's logistically problematic to put a grocery store in the floor plate size on the Alaska-facing side of the project without an alley vacation, but it seems to me that you could also put a grocery store on the Fauntleroy size, and of course there's nothing that would require a grocery store that could be able to retail. In the scenarios that have been proposed, developing this site without the alley vacation would result in fewer square footage of retail, but a greater number of housing units, and we're also certainly in a shortage of housing at the moment in the city. We could always use a little more. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's certainly developable. But for various reasons, the developer has chosen to pursue an alley vacation process. And so the information before us, we have in this discretionary decision of what we want to look at, and how I framed it up. Councilmember Rasmussen, I thought you did a very thorough job, so I won't go into detail, but there's a question about the protection of the public trust, and you talked about the criteria there. This framework is designed to be kind of transparent and also predictable for folks going through this, and so I want to also support that and honor that. There's the protection from adverse land use impacts, and finally there's the provision for public benefit. And it's around the issue of provision for public benefit where I'm not convinced this project reaches the threshold where I'm prepared to support the alley vacation. And specifically the mid-block connector and the neighborhood design, neighborhood plan intent to make that really a pedestrian-oriented mid-block connector to divide up what otherwise might be a super block to make connection to the Green Street and the soon-to-be park. When I look at the traffic studies that have done on what that alley kind of T-alley is going to look like, the numbers show that there are nearly 5,000 cars a day that will be accessing those alleys. At peak hour, I think it was 680 cars in 1 hour. And that's a lot of traffic. And while I think they did, SDOT did a good job in dedicating the sidewalk to meet certain standards for safety, I don't think it meets the intent of trying to create a real pedestrian-friendly environment. And when I look at the idea around, can we put other conditions on this to deliver that, I'm not sure that we can, actually. And I think someone in public comment mentioned it, someone who I think supported the project, but said, come on, this is a loading dock. Why would a pedestrian want to go there? And I think 5,000 cars a day do speak to this. There's just not a way to put the traffic that's necessary for a grocery store in a way that's going to work very well. I think we've done as good a job as can given the design that the developers put forward. I personally think that this doesn't quite meet the public benefit, and I don't see conditions that we could put in place to meet it given the current design. And so I will be voting against this allocation.
Councilmember Licata.
I don't want to jump in front of anyone else if they, I guess not. Okay. I'm going to go back. I've got more questions on this design, if you don't mind. Again, I'm using the mid-block connector. Perhaps you have a slide on that. Yeah, that would be good. You know what? My concern also is public benefits, and I think Councilman O'Brien touched on it, as my concerns are. But also the mid-block connector pedestrian element here that's presented. I just don't understand how it's going to work, because we have your letter E, which you've got an 8-foot sidewalk. I don't understand where it connects. It's on the side of the Masonic Lodge. There's no retail outlet, from what I can see, that would be feeding that. There's not a sidewalk on the other side. There's just one sidewalk going through there. And then you've got the alley, which, as Councilman O'Brien pointed out, there's quite a few auto traffic going through. The folks that are shopping at Whole Foods are going to the retail garage across the street. There's parking on this side, but that's to just the residential, or is that going to have Whole Foods as well, parking? Yes, that one.
This one, I think the garages do link up below grade, but the intention is that the access here, the portion of the garage here, would really be focused for residents. And I think the majority of it would be for the grocery store, although, Beverly, do you have anything different to say about
No,
that?
that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, the intention of as you're looking at E, was that with the sidewalk, with the pedestrian activity directed to the south side, the north side that has the garage entry for the trucks and the garbage room, that there is that separation. So we really are, the design attempts to direct pedestrians where they have a continuous, separated, really standard street sidewalk adjacent to this.
And the 8-foot width is similar to a residential street sidewalk width. The difference here, of course, is, and there's also the 3-foot wide planting strip. The difference is that this would include a covered sidewalk. There would be overhead weather protection the entire length, which you would not see necessarily on a city sidewalk.
All in favor of covered sidewalks, I think it's a good idea. This doesn't seem to work as far as just a pedestrian area. It seems like the design elements are fine, but they seem to be floating in desert-like spaces, because I don't see where you're going to see pedestrians using that side of the sidewalk. There's no destination on either side of that sidewalk. The Whole Foods doesn't open up to this connector. So it strikes me as a sense of artificial construction, where we have an 8-foot sidewalk that's covered. I think it's great, but I don't get who it's serving.
Oh, well, if I may try to answer that. This is a very, very large site. And without this type of connector, pedestrians would have to go all the way around to either Edmonds or to Alaska. And what they may be wanting to do is to go to the retail that's on Fauntleroy, or they may want to go to the park that's on 40th Avenue Southwest without going all the way around this very large site. So it serves a very practical function. SDOT has told us that it's being designed in a way that is safe. And so it is an important part of the project that has been envisioned by the community in their plan. It does accommodate both vehicles as well as pedestrians. As I mentioned earlier, it would be difficult, if not impossible, to have a mid-block or to have a pedestrian connector with the current alley because it's so narrow. It's about 20 feet wide. As you probably, if you've been up to the site, have seen, it's quite narrow. It's quite close to Alaska. And if it's to serve the delivery and utility functions, it's unlikely that the current alley would provide that pedestrian connection that the community wants. So this actually does provide, I think, the type of pedestrian connection that has been envisioned and is being designed in a way, according to SDOT, that is safe.
Well, I appreciate that, and we've obviously heard differing opinions as far as whether it meets their expectations or not. To me, it just doesn't seem to meet what I've heard as far as the community wants. And there's also all the bicycles going through, possibly, and mixing with because it won't be denied access, and if in fact they do end up having some sort of attraction to on both ends, then we'll end up with bikes that, no, we could debate it. I don't need to go back.
Sure,
and forth.
we've heard people say that it does meet their vision. We've heard other people say that it doesn't meet their vision. So the community is divided, as we know. But as you know, the design review board as well as the design commission have both reviewed this aspect of it as well and have approved it.
Thank you.
Other comments, Councilmember Swan, look like you're ready to comment or not?
There's none.
Please, yes.
Thank you, Councilmember Rasmussen, and thank you all for presenting everything that you have been, and for all the work that you all have done in Brian. I want to say that I've been to that space, I've visited that whole location, and I don't think that anybody is going to argue that it wouldn't be a good idea to have some sort of vibrant development in that location. I think everybody in the neighborhood would want something neighborhood friendly to happen there, something that people could walk to, something that would make what's right now sort of a deserted, sort of blighted space into something really that people could be engaged in and involved in. But I also think that it's problematic if decisions are taken outside the context of what impact it's actually going to have on the neighborhood, on jobs. And while it is true that historically, as the report says, the City Council has required that the public benefit be physical and tangible, from a legislative standpoint, I also don't think that just because something has been done a certain way is a good enough argument to continue doing that till the end of time. I mean, laws have evolved because laws or policies or policy recommendations have to keep up with or meet the needs of the community today. And I think, as Doug have said that themselves eloquently, they say that these new policy questions, the questions of living wage jobs, unionized jobs, and the question of social justice issues, working conditions, wages, and so on, all the things that, as Councilmember Rasmussen stated correctly, are not part of the policy realm that the Council has so far looked at in terms of whether or not to grant an allocation. However, these are important questions for real people, whether they're included in the policy proposals hitherto or not. That's not the question. The question is, it is important for people. And as Donna said, these new policy questions are not addressed in the current adopted street vacation policies. And the City Council has not addressed these questions in a way that can provide guidance for SDOT in this recommendation. The question of how broadly public benefit can be defined clearly requires a broader discussion and a review of the goals and limitations of the existing policies. And following these policy discussions, the City Council can determine whether it wishes to revise or update the policies for future projects. Now, the key operative word here is future projects. SDOT is saying, well, for future projects we can do that. But the reality is that when it's the interests of workers or unionized jobs or wages, it's always postponed. And I think that we've had development after development in the city where that is not being prioritized, and I think it's important to raise a voice to that. I also wanted to note in that context that, as you laid out the whole timeline of how public comment was taken, and I think Lucas, you said that outreach and public comment had been taken prior to even the application being submitted. So I don't think that it's true that this is something that is being foisted on the developers right now. I mean, this has been part of the discussion all along, and yet, the discussion didn't go to a point where, okay, maybe we need to review the question of how public benefit is defined, and if the objections to a Whole Foods came up from the very beginning, then the process is transparent and predictable, and the process does need to set aside and review, okay, what do we need to do here? Maybe we need to expand the definition of public benefit. I think it is important for us to note that the Whole Foods will be built in a location where there are several other grocery stores within a mile radius. As far as I know, all of whom employ unionized workers who are, just as a matter of fact, they have a much better position to bargain for their benefits and for their wages. It's also known that Whole Foods as a corporation has carried out systematic efforts to prevent unionization within their workforce, and there are many other objections to working conditions and so on. So I think that while it is absolutely correct what Councilmember Rasmussen is saying, that, the alley vacation process hasn't taken all this into account so far, but I think that as a legislative body, it is incumbent upon us to take those decisions into account, take those considerations into account if unionized jobs are at stake, and they will be. I mean, let's be clear, once the giant Whole Foods comes there, the other jobs in the other grocery stores will be, there is a potential threat to that. So I will be voting no on this.
Thank you. Are there other comments from council members? If not, I would call for a vote. So I would move approval of this, conceptual approval of this alley vacation. Yes. So I'm just, and the second is, so, okay. All in favor say aye. Aye. Against? Nay?
No.
So 3 and 5.